You know, when I was talking about China having tariffs on imported goods, and I didn't realize that, I'm not complaining about China. I'm saying, hey, these guys are doing they're doing it right. They're you know, China for the Chinese. They're doing it in a way that will protect their country, that will protect their economy. Why can't we do that? Oh, that's right. Transnational corporations don't like it. This is where the Chinese basically fascistic model, I mean, using the classic Mussolini definition of fascism, which is the merger of state and business enterprises. Some of the largest, most consequential, and most powerful Chinese companies are owned by or owned in part by the Chinese government. And those that are not are so heavily regulated by the Chinese government that they may as well. And China's demonstrating that, hey, there's another kind of capitalism out there. Actually, China wasn't the first to demonstrate this. Singapore was. And the president of Singapore, I think his name is Xi, as I recall. I forget. It's been a long, long time. But he, you know, back in the 50s, he pioneered this state capitalism thing and turned Singapore from a sleepy little backwater into a fully modern, you know, state-of-the-art, super incredible city where everybody's afraid of the government. I mean, it's basically a police state, but boy, do the trains run on time and the taxis. In fact, I've been in a cab in downtown Singapore. Singapore is both a city and a nation. It's a city-state. Where the cab driver was driving along, and all of a sudden I hear this bing, 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 bing come off the dashboard, and he's like, oh, and he takes his foot off the gas, and it stops. They have the cabs. They're so rigorous about their speed limit enforcement there. I mean, keep in mind, this is a country where they will put you to death for bringing drugs in, and they will arrest you for chewing gum, even possessing gum. And I mean, they may have done away with that very recently, but I don't think so. It certainly was the case when I was there. But their capitalism works really well because the rules of the game of capitalism are defined by the government. So what you have in China and Singapore is sort of the direction that Charles Murray is suggesting the United States should go in. See, here's the challenge that conservatives have with capitalism. And that is that to the extent that capitalism is regulated by a democratic domestic marketplace, to the extent to which a country says, you know, we're going to make sure that if somebody engages in capitalism in our country, if somebody wants to, you know, to put out the money to start a business and then live off that money when it comes back to them, if somebody wants to be a capitalist in our country, if businesses are going to operate in our country that are not owned by the government, they have to do so in a way that actually benefits the people. And so, you know, the Chinese government, for example, they just over the weekend, big discussion about the Chinese government and the Saudis, for that matter, both of them saying, you know, by 2050, we're not going to be consuming any fossil fuels. And I mean, this is amazing. But they both have an abundance of sunlight and wind. And sun power and wind power are actually cheaper than fossil fuel power right now. If you take away the $5 trillion a year in subsidies that we give to the fossil fuel companies, and you add in the actual costs of fossil fuel from fly ash ponds near coal-fired power plants to you know, downwind cancers from refineries to asthma in the cities, and I mean, just on it goes, right? All those poisons. But the essence of this, the real essence of this, what Mitch McConnell is talking about back in 2011 when he said, the Constitution must be amended to keep the government in check. This is Mitch McConnell. He said, we've tried persuasion. We've tried negotiations. We've tried elections. Nothing has worked. Huh? We've tried elections. Nothing has worked. What Mitch McConnell is complaining about is the same stuff that conservatives have been complaining about from the founding of our republic, which is that they don't believe in small d democracy and a small r republic. They believe in oligarchy. Alexander Hamilton of the Constitutional Convention suggested that the president should be called His Royal Highness and should be appointed for life, that we should basically have a king. He was laughed out of the assembly. He was so offended, so embarrassed, and so angry, he went back to New York City the next day and didn't come back for 2 months. But he said it. He proposed it. And this has always been the problem that conservatives have. They genuinely believe the biblical story that we're all born out of a woman, and women are the source of all evil, as it were, because Eve, made that deal with the snake, and therefore, right? Therefore, democracy is a problem. And this is essentially what Charles Murray is saying. So what he's calling for, or what is generally being called for by conservatives, and it's something that they've always been calling for, whether they were Republican conservatives or Democratic conservatives throughout the history of this country and all around the world, is rule by the rich. We're back to Calvinism. How do we know who is somebody who is actually good, who didn't get that original sin when they came through mom's birth canal? How do we know who those people are, who God has blessed? How do we know who the statesmen are versus the politicians, the people who you can actually trust and who are going to do the best thing for the country? Well, it appears that the way you know is because they're rich. This is Calvinism's contribution to American democracy, and it's basically oligarchy's contribution. This has been the justification for hereditary kingdoms for centuries, for millennia. And now they want to bring it to the United States. And the Koch brothers are obliging. Hey, yeah, we'll raise $800 million and almost $1 billion and help decide some elections, which they've been doing fairly aggressively for the last decade, it seems. And it's not just the Koch brothers, of course. It's, as Charles Murray correctly points out, we have this whole new class of billionaires that have been created as a consequence of the Reagan tax cuts and the Reagan compensation law changes so that CEOs can pay themselves with stock options. And the result of that is this rise of a billionaire class that now has enough financial power that, to paraphrase Henry Wallace, the Vice President of the United States in 1944, they can reach out for government power and use the power of the government and the power of the marketplace at the same time to destroy unions and keep the eternal man in subjection.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-536-2370.
Excuse me, the phrase from Henry Wallace, keep the average man, the working man, in eternal subjection. We'll be right back.